Do you know what it's time for?
What, time for me to hug Brad? I don't know. What is it time for?
Well, listen, it's always time for that. It's also time to start the music. It's time to light the lights. It's time to watch the Muppets on the Muppet Show tonight.
Yeah. Oh, Brad.
I've got to ask you, are you and your kids watching the Muppet Show on Disney Plus?
Yes. And so did Disney like remaster them or something? Because they also look great. Like it feels like they cleaned up the film. They must have thrown a few bucks at it.
I so want to talk about this. Yes, it really does. We're sitting around the Geiger dinner table talking, and it was the week that Disney Plus released it, which of course, as you know, the backstory there, they had so many legal loopholes to get through to get the Muppet Show streaming because they had to go to every individual performer, they had to get individual movie rights.
Oh, did Henson and Company not have the sign-offs that were workable for a streaming age? Oh my God.
No. They had to go and do all. It was also the reason that putting a DVD box set collection was so difficult because they had to do all of it individually, one after another. And you know, from doing stripped, just getting the music rights to a song that nobody's sung in 100 years, is still cost prohibitive.
And I'll tell you, even for really good lawyers like Disney, the Muppets had a lot of old vaudevillian tunes, and you think like, oh, that's no problem. Yes, it is. Fred and I had some, they're called needle drops. Fred and I had some needle drops in the documentary where it took me the better part of like 6 weeks to find out who the true owner of that copyright was. Yep. And they're like, no, I own the recording rights, but the book rights are owned by blankety blank. It's an estate out of New York that's a 100-year-old matriarch, and you have to reach out by letter. Like, there are some songs that are impossible. Sorry, keep going. But so basically the Muppets had a lot of rights issues. Okay.
Yeah. So we're talking about it, and you know, we're saying, listen, this was our Friday night. This was, you watched the Muppet Show, you watched, depending on which part of the country you were in, you either watched After the Muppets, you watched Hee Haw or Sha Na Na. We were a Hee Haw family. Carolyn's family was a Sha Na Na family. And then you took a bath and went to bed, and that was a Friday night back in the late 70s and early 80s, and we liked it that way. It was a fantastic Friday night. And we're talking about it, and we're like, so I can't wait to watch it. Well, my kids are a little older than yours. They're 15 and 18, and they're like, let's watch it together, because we've gotten into this nice little pattern of watching a little TV together after dinner. Usually it's been anime, but the kids are like, let's watch the Muppet Show. And I'm like, you sure? It might not connect with you guys. It's going to be different. It's a variety show. You know, you're going to have a singer, and then you're going to have comedy, and then a skit, and then another song. They're like, oh, we want to watch it. And so my hopes were not high. Surprisingly enough, we've been watching it every night since. They've loved it. Some of it is so bad that it's good. Like some of the skits and stuff, they're so bad that they're good. Some of it's just fun. Like my 18-year-old has really been fascinated watching how they do the practical effects of doing puppetry on a stage like this. Some of the practical effects were brilliant. Some of it was just straight up green screen. Some of it was some very tricky kind of effects that they did. But we found out so far for us, it's been fascinating seeing which performers stood the test of time and which ones just didn't. Some of them were not good. And
also which ones who were inarguably amazing actors or actresses or musicians, but just didn't, quote, get it when they got on stage with the Muppets. You know, like a Dom DeLuise or Rita Moreno or even like a George Burns. Amazing with the Muppets, right? Like so good. And then you get somebody else and you'd be like, oh, they don't get it. They don't get what the energy of this is. The mood is wrong in their presentational style.
Although I do have to, you suggested Dom DeLuise. That show was a clunker for our family. We did not enjoy the Dom DeLuise episode, but George, that's what for us. What has been crystallizing in our house? Those old people with the roots in vaudeville
roots.
Milton Berle, George Burns, Bob Hope episode wasn't great, but Phyllis Diller. Those were the strongest episodes because these are all folks with the roots in vaudeville. that knew how to sing. They knew how to dance. They knew how to tell jokes. They could go from one to another. And it was really interesting because we got to the end of the George Burns episode, and other than watching him blow smoke on TV, which nobody would have cigarette or cigar smoke, he's blowing smoke all over the Muppets. but George Burns knew how to interact with the Muppets. Like Phyllis Diller didn't make the right eye contact. George Burns, those Muppets were real to him, and it was fascinating to watch.
You're absolutely right about the people that had vaudeville experience, because like Milton Berle, like he cut his teeth on 20,000 hours of stage performances before he ever got on a TV, and then radio work before he ever got on a TV. So like you put him in the Muppets and he's like, I know this. I get what this is.
Yes.
I know how to do this, you know? George Burns, same thing. And then the younger ones, you'd get like a 1970s pop star on the Muppets, and they weren't that good to begin with, but also they didn't get what the energy of the Muppets were, that they needed to be the joke. They needed to be the butt of the joke for the scene to work.
Yes.
Milton Berle got that. George Burns got that. Rita Moreno got that. Like the younger ones didn't get that, you know?
And it's so funny you say cut his teeth, because we were talking about the better screens. You're saying maybe they cleaned it up. You realize what a freaking odd face Milton Berle had. His face was a horror show. Like his mouth was too big for his teeth.
Like his smile is actually not a friendly smile.
No, he's got janky teeth, and he's got cheekbones that pull away from his skull. He was a scary looking guy.
It's like, what's funny is American television has slowly sanitized what's sort of allowed, if you know what I mean, onto television. Yes. Like if you ever watch like British TV, like a cop show, you're like, oh, ha ha, all right, we're doing 1970s American television here. But yeah, so with George Burns, you get like smoking, you get like him actively drinking whiskey. He's like, don't mind me, Kermit, as he's pouring himself 4 fingers, you know, and you're like, whoa, you would not be allowed to do that on TV nowadays. Yeah. But what I love though about, and this is actually worth talking about for ComicLab, because it's instructive for artists, is that Henson and Oz and the whole company allowed for human moments, human failure moments in the actual performance, and then allowed for imperfect sketches that a company like Disney is no longer allowing for the Muppets. Like now, the Muppets are kind of like joke automatons, like set up, punchline, set up, punchline. Right. Whereas Oz allowed for, and Henson allowed for, a whole musical moment that basically was intended to be like, isn't Kermit having a shitty day? Or isn't Miss Piggy imperfect in this moment, you know? And Disney doesn't allow for that anymore. They don't allow for the Muppets to have a fuller range of human emotion. It's all just joke, slipping on a banana now, you know?
Right. Yeah. Today's Muppets have the emotional range that goes all the way from A to B. But Henson's Muppets could experience sadness.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And here's the thing. Just before we wrap up this conversation, did you watch the Steve Martin episode?
Not yet, but I bet he's amazing.
You know what? You're in for a disappointment. His episode really faltered, and he did all of his classic stuff that he was doing in the 70s, you know, the wild and crazy stuff, not laugh one in our house. And it was amazing because I turned to my kids and I said, this is 1977, 1978. Steve Martin was filling stadiums with this act.
Oh, like, yes.
It was this act. He was doing balloon animals. He was doing the banjo.
Arrow through the head, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah.
All of it. And he was filling stadiums. And they're like, we're so glad we weren't alive in the 70s.
Yeah, he bought a 4th house with that
That's
bit.
Right, he did.
And on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to ComicLab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's hour of comics advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We got a whole show today. It's a Patreon Power Hour that we're going to be talking about Patreon and various aspects of cartooning and the social media sphere. But before we do that, we want to give a huge shout out and thanks to our sponsor for this week's episode, the good folks at Bonjoro over at BONJORO.com. And just for a reminder for everybody, what Bonjoro is, it is a personalized outreach platform where when someone backs you on Patreon, when someone buys something from your store, when someone picks up in original art. You get pinged on the Bonjoro app on your phone. You can immediately spin around. It's kind of actually fun if you're out walking on the street, like, hey, Greg, I'm walking my dog. I saw you just got a book, and I wanted to say a huge personal thank you. You go, boop, it sends it to whatever it goes around the world. You don't have to directly, the platform sends it for you. And it is an amazing emotional outreach, direct artist to audience outreach that Brad and I have found incredibly effective for the show and for our own cartooning.
Absolutely. And like we've said in the past, speaking of Patreon, Patreon did some studies saying that that when people get these Bonjoro messages, they end up becoming Patreon backers for a longer period of time. They end up sticking around for longer because they feel that personal connection to you.
Right.
So it's something that we're really kind of proud to share with you. And to make things better, there's an exclusive offer just for ComicLab listeners. So here's how it works. You can sign up for, even without ComicLab, you could sign up for Bonjoro and get a free 14-day trial. That's just something that they do because they're nice folks over there. But for ComicLab, after that trial is up, you've got an exclusive offer. If you decide this is the right fit for you, you can sign up using our special offer code, and you can get 20% off Bonjoro for life.
I kind of want to. I want to add one of those stickers of, burr, 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 you know.
Yeah.
I wish I could do that better. All you need to use is use the coupon code ComicLabApril, all one word, ComicLabApril, and that will give you 20% off your entire run of Bonjoro for the rest of your life. So once again, go over to bonjoro.com, BONJORO.com. And Bradley J. Geiger, let's jump right in on Patreon this week because there's a lot of things developing in the world of social media where Twitter is clearly heading down the Patreon route, and I can imagine, and you can imagine, that Instagram and Facebook will be quick on their heels, where Twitter is now going to start offering what's called a super follow, where, you can get all the Brad Geiger tweets, but if you give Brad Geiger $1 and a shiny apple, you can get his special tweets, his super follow tweets every month, right? And so you see why they're clearly seeing, oh, hey, Patreon is working. People are willing to pay for that for stuff. And Twitter's also realizing, hey, we're not making that much money. How can we monetize this?
We're gonna have to do something.
Hey guys, can everybody throw a couple dollars in the old pot here? We got to pay for the rent. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this, Brad, because I guarantee that you have better thoughts on this than I do. What do you think, first and foremost, before we get into the wider spectrum of Twitter alone offering super follows for Twitter followers of Brad Geiger, of Elon Musk, or whoever it is, where they can pay $1 a month, $5 a month, and get the super follow tweets in addition to their regular tweets?
I can see this working for some people, and I can see that it's probably not going to be me, but I can see it working for some people. Here's what I mean. A lot of people, when this came out, in fact, this was the conversation in the ComicLab Discord server. They were kind of discussing it back and forth. And, some people were saying, well, Patreon does a lot of things well, but one thing it doesn't do well is discoverability.
Yes,
and Twitter, meanwhile, is very good at discoverability. It's really what Twitter's kind of all about, is discoverability. So if you can convert those people right there in that moment to sign up for your special subscription Patreon version of Twitter, then that's a good thing. The problem, so here's part of the problem. They've announced it, they haven't released it. So we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we do know it's going to be part of the existing Twitter background and the Twitter platform. So I can see this working for a single panel cartoonist, right? Somebody whose work fits very well within the Twitter platform. For me, not so much. I work in full pages, graphic novels, and so forth.
I like the quiet pride of that. For me, not so much. What I produce is a thing of beauty. It's a full-page graphic novel. It's not a single. I just like the quiet. Now what I do, we could all agree, is Picasso-level work over here, and it's all. Just kidding. It's just.
No, but I guess what my point is, it doesn't work as well on Twitter. And again, Twitter even limits you to like 3 images that you can upload.
I hate that.
So even on Facebook, I can do a panel by panel swipe on my comic if I uploaded it that way. I can't do that on Twitter. So I can't even offer my sequential stuff in that format. And also, in terms of like what I offer on Patreon, there's a lot of storylines. There's a lot of arcs. There's a lot of standalone stories. It becomes really much more difficult to follow that on Twitter unless they make some changes along with this. So for me, I'm not as excited about it. For some people, I could see where this might be something that they might experiment with.
Yeah, well, I guess for me, first of all, I agree with you. Because my immediate thought is, well, how does this work for a YouTuber? Because they can't put that video up on YouTube. It has to be now posted, I would imagine, as a 2, 3, 5, 10-minute video on Twitter. Well, they don't have the current capability to do that, right? What about musicians who share certain things? How is that audio track going to be shared? And so it's worth talking about or revisiting what really works for Patreon, I think. And that is, you build your audience wherever you want to build your audience. Just point them to Patreon. If you need to have them on your Google Plus page, great, you go build the Google Plus page.
If you can still find it.
Yeah. How you feeling about MySpace? You like that? Go ahead, build your community on MySpace. No, what I'm getting at though is that because here's why I like that. The world is changeable, and for you as an artist, you can meet them where they are, right? You can go to Twitter, you can go to Facebook, you can go to Instagram, and you can customize it. You can have it on Webtoons, you can have tapas, you can have whatever you want to do. But you can say, hey, are you really enjoying my work in the format that I'm presenting to you in native format for this platform? Great. Then go support me on Patreon, and then you'll get all this extra stuff, right? And there's a certain advantage and a logic to that. Whereas in Twitter, first of all, I agree with you that right now they don't currently have the right setup in terms of frame limitations of 4 frames for people like you and for a lot of people to go bigger. And how would they support YouTube? How would they support musicians? How would they support, interpretive dance people to put up videos? So I don't know that they're going to have to change their basic format, but also there's a limitation in a weird way that I don't enjoy as an artist, that like, oh, you can only back me on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. And like, it's a splintering that, I mean, listen, if we end up having to do it 5 years from now, we'll figure out a way to do it. I just don't love the idea. I think there's a better experience to be had on Patreon, who has built their whole platform on find your audience wherever you find them, build them however you build them, and then just bring them here. That's all you got to do,
Yeah. And I agree. And as I've said in the past, I don't like the idea of setting up multiple Patreon clones, or, that have Patreon and having another type of Patreon, because now you've got to go out and not only upload work to all of those, but you've got to maintain those communities and so forth. So I've always said I like keeping it right there on Patreon. The argument for the subscription Twitter is that you can capture them while they're right there. I'm not sure I 100% agree with that, because let's think about logically what happens. You're going to say, hey, join my Twitter. What do they call that again? Twitter, my super follows. Join my super follows. Well, to do that, they're going to have to click a link, and then they're going to have to sign up, and then go through that process, credit card, right?
Yeah, put in another credit card, basically, by the way.
In other words, they're going to have to do exactly what they had to do to sign up for Patreon. They click a link, and then they go through it. You know what I mean? It's not that different from what they would have done through Patreon. And this whole idea that you capture them while they're there's not a big difference. Click a link, it's a click a link.
Yeah. So I actually have a lot of questions that are coming up as you say that. My first is, do we know any artist, anyone who has successfully launched both a Patreon and a Ko-fi or whatever that coffee, whatever the hell that thing is called? Like, does anyone successfully run and navigate 2 of them that are both doing great, or that are both worth their time of having to double post and double list and double subscribe and double, all the work that would entail?
I don't know. In fact, my perception is the opposite. When I see people who have a Patreon and a Ko-fi and a this and a that, those are the people that seem to be struggling the most.
Right.
and it's like, well, I'll get a little bit from here and a little bit from there. And part of me wants to say, listen, if you just focus your attention on making one thing really good, instead of chasing a nickel over here and chasing a dime over there, if you just focus, you might. But again, I don't know. I've never gone and run the numbers, so that's my perception.
I think you and I have talked about this in the past, is that it suffers from a marketing problem, which is it's the same kind of thing that if you ran a Kickstarter for a book, the same time you ran a GoFundMe for that same book, that the same time you ran a Indiegogo for that same book, right? So here's what the marketing ends up sounding like. Hey, everybody, I'm making a new book, bada bing, bada boom. This is great. We're all excited, right? Great. You can back me on Kickstarter or Indiegogo or GoFundMe or my grandmother's backyard, whatever works for you.
That's right. And by the way, you're exactly right in that that's such a weak marketing push.
It sounds
and
thirsty,
it also makes it sound
desperate.
like it. Yeah, it's desperate because if you had something you really were sure of, or something you really were proud of and confident in, you'd say, "I'm buying this thing. It's in one place. You want it? Go get it."
Yeah.
That's your marketing because you think it's so good that you wouldn't want to do anything other than get it, and you're going to do what you're going to need to get it. Instead of saying, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this. You're absolutely right. The marketing is weak.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and not only that, but here's another thing I wanted to talk about. Facebook actually launched their Patreon clone back in February of 2019. They've already done something like this. I wrote about it for webcomics.com, and it's something that we're going to have to keep our eye on because there were three major announcements or three major takeaways from the announcement. Number one, and by the way, I was so turned off on this. If they've changed it since February 2019, I have no idea about it because I was so disinterested in it. I never looked at it again. But this is my webcomics.com post from 2019. Three major takeaways. Number one, Facebook plans to take a 30% cut of the money generated by subscriptions. That's 30% cut.
Hello, Zuckerberg. Good work.
The terms of service grant Facebook lifetime rights over the intellectual property.
No, they don't.
After the creator ends the business relationship.
No, they don't. Facebook, what is wrong with you?
And Facebook gave itself the right to offer a discounted subscription without your previous approval to reduce and reduce your share accordingly. So
Facebook.
They could offer a sale on your subscriptions, reduce your share, and you wouldn't have anything to do with it. Now, again, I got to preface
shut your mouth, Facebook. This is ridiculous.
That was when it was first announced. And like I said, I was so confident I'd never be using this thing that I never looked at it again. So if they changed it, you'll have to let me know. I couldn't care less. But the reason I bring that up is Twitter might do something similar. They might have similar. We're going to have to look at their terms of service very carefully. Remember, Patreon takes about 10%, 5% for the credit card transactions. That goes right off the top, same as Kickstarter for the credit card companies. And then they take between like 5 and 7% for Patreon itself. If Twitter takes more than that, then that's a big problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Then it's like, what do you, and then we're also going to have to take a look at the terms and service and decide whether this is the right fit.
Absolutely. So you're right that is worth the next level of consideration. And I think the third level of consideration is, okay, let's say you've agreed to everyone's terms of service, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Patreon. You now have 4 places. So here's where the logistics get shitty for you as an artist. You now have to format, post, and keep updating with 4 different platforms that are each going to have their individual comments. And by the way, if you think like, you can just post and forget it, those super followers are going to want super follower attention, right?
Yes, they do.
I'm paying for you. I want to be able to interact with Brad Geiger. By the way, I do want to be able to interact with Brad Geiger. So I am going to be.
Who doesn't?
I'm going to.
Who doesn't?
I just feel like we're setting ourselves up for problems in a lot of veins. Because let me say this a different way. I think this is a great idea for Twitter. I agree from a business perspective. This is smart on their half to get a little slice of this patronage pie. I absolutely agree with you. I just don't know that it's a good idea for the cartoonists that are on Twitter. Now, having said that, I know a lot of comedy writers. I know a lot of TV writers that are on Twitter and have built massive 100,000, 500,000 follower kind of things. They have, as yet, no way to monetize their Twitter following. So I can see, especially for comedy writers, a certain appeal of this because up to now they've had no way aside from a book deal to monetize their Twitter following. Now, again, that doesn't necessarily mean this is good for cartoonists, but I can see for a certain type of artist, a certain type of person, maybe even a certain type of journalist, instead of doing one of those paid Substacks that they're starting to do, maybe they do certain journalism that's behind a paywall of super followers. I get that. Again, I don't know that it's good for cartoonists.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to talk about under this heading is that, and I've alluded to this in the past, and this is high time we talk about it. I think it's time and this is a harbinger of things to come. And
wait, I have always pronounced that harbinger. Is it harbinger? Okay, because I've learned from you recently.
I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
No, I mean, you taught me about February, which I've said February wrong for my entire life. So I always like learning from you the correct way to say things. So
I'm that one I'm going to be probably wrong on, but it's going to be a herald of things to come. Because that one I know I'm pronouncing right. It's the canary in the coal mine.
There we go.
So here's what's happening. And I've been seeing this. There's a lot of things that's gelling right now, and I think we are very much in what I alluded to earlier as late stage social media. I think we're at the end of the social media era of the web, or coming very, very close to the end of the social media era. And I think this is one of the things that's going to start that pendulum swinging back to where I've got thoughts, but it's going to start swinging back or away from social media, because what's going to happen is pretty soon you're going to see people. Number one, the more I talk to people, the more I'm finding this to be true, not only for me, but for the people I talk to. Social media is less and less satisfying.
Yes, less effective. Yeah.
Yeah, it's from a promotional standpoint, way less effective, right? We've all talked about the algorithm, how the algorithm tightens and everything. From a promotional aspect, it's gotten less effective. From a reader aspect, from somebody who just used to enjoy scrolling through Twitter, it's harder and harder to find things that are interesting. Instagram is the same thing, harder and harder. It's like, nah, okay. Part of this is like the newness has worn off. Part of it is it's harder and harder to find content that is joyful, that brings you joy on social media.
From a user standpoint, Brad, I completely agree with you. Not as a creator, but as a user. If I follow Brad Geiger, I want to see Brad Geiger, everything that Brad Geiger posts. That is my personal preference. But it is not to Instagram or Twitter or Facebook's benefit for them to show me everything of yours unless you pay for it. So that single act has ruined in the last 5 years social media for me, because when I followed you, I want to follow you. I have made a choice. You and I have made an unspoken agreement. I will create these things. Hey, I will read the things you create. Great. Let's do that on Twitter. Now it's like, I will create these things. Hopefully Twitter will show it to you, that kind of, or Instagram will show it to you. And that ruins the whole social compact of what you and I are doing there as reader and audience.
Earlier, in fact, I argue very strongly that not everybody, I don't think you wanted to see every last thing that I posted. And for a while, the algorithm, I would argue, was working really well. In other words, it would show you some of the things that I said that were more interested. If I just posted a link to someplace, hey, look at this thing that's someplace else, you got to click a link. Right. That one died very quickly. And if I posted, here's my comic, and here's something interesting about it, that one had legs, okay? And for a long time, I would argue that the algorithm was your friend, that it was making you a smarter poster. It was making you think about what you post. Instead of just posting something, here's a link, it made you post the comic. For a long time, I think the algorithm was your friend. I think we've gotten past that now, that it has gotten so tight that, like you said, it's harder to reach the people with the stuff that they actually do want to see.
I think their internal testing probably showed that a lot of people were tweeting about or Instagramming about the sandwich that they had, and that was getting no interaction. So they're like, look, we clearly have to throttle that back. But I think also in the interest of selling access to your own audience, they throttled way too far.
And you're right about that.
We're going to have the Awkward Yeti on the show in a couple of weeks here. And I know in the past that he's in the millions of followers on Instagram and Facebook. and has a real trouble reaching his own damn followers. And that's why it goes to a point that is worth repeating for Brad and I, which is the platform is not necessarily your friend. And if you are building your audience and your business on a platform or trusting a platform to do the right thing for you, that is a unwise decision. So one of the reasons why I like Patreon as a construct is that it allows me to put many legs under my table, so that if Twitter goes bonkers, or if Facebook becomes unruly, or if Instagram is unscrupulous with their new terms of service, if any of those things happen, I can switch to something else, and Patreon can be the rock solid, So
same thing with platforms like Tapas and Webtoons.
Yep. Yeah, or Go Comics or any of those. Yeah, that you can make the switch away from. Brad got a look on that. By the way,
every time I go to a Go Comics site, it's like, oh yeah, I remember 2005. Is anybody actually using Go Comics for a platform?
Because you know why? Calvin and Hobbes still brings in a ton of people, and rightly so. They still want to read that. Farside. Yeah,
they don't want to read anybody else though.
Yeah, but I have to say, though, as a side note, because it's been funny as a reminder for everybody listening to the podcast, Brad and I are now on a video feed with each other, and we have the ability to mute our mics as we go, but we can see one another muting the mics. I just want to share, this has been the most bodily function heavy show that you and I have ever had, because I keep spotting you mute, then I mute, then you, and it's like either a sneeze, a burp, a scratch, a hiccup. Yeah. I don't know what did we both have like a plate full of Italian sausages for breakfast this morning? Like we're both like
as a matter of fact, I did. I had exactly that.
What an attractive thing that we are sparing the world from with the mute on these microphones. So thank God for muting. That's great. But anyway,
but there's one thing I want to ask. Oh, go ahead. Oh,
I was going to say, long story short, with Super Follow, I think, again, this is one of those things that I think it's wise for the platform. I think it benefits the platform. I think maybe even there will be cartoonists for whom they can make it work. And frankly, go with God. If you can make it work for your business, I have no intrinsic problem with it. I don't know that I can make it work for mine. And I think most cartoonists would benefit from rather having the unitary presence on Patreon rather than a split presence on these different platforms. But I also want to say, it was one last thing, Brad, because I always appreciate good marketing. And I think Super Follower is such a good name compared to that platform we had the other day that was like Leaky Wiener. What was that one that was called?
The Leaky Drip? Are you talking?
Drip? Yeah, that's what it was.
Are you talking about Drip?
Drip. Yes, it was a terrible name. Drip.
And it crashed and burned appropriately.
Yes, because it's just like so much of your existence is built upon the name as the rock, and Drip is just like, imagine anybody you meet at a party that you would describe as a drip, or imagine any situation where you're faced with a drip. None of that is good. No situation in life is good with a drip.
Yeah, anytime you hear somebody telling their doctor they've got one of those, you know it's a bad deal.
So anyway, I just want to say, like, at the very least, I can acknowledge that Twitter has at least a good marketing name here, in that Super Follower is a fun name. It has a little interior bounce of bump-a-dump-a-dump. Super is always good as a literal superlative, so that's great. And anyway, so I go in with a grain of salt. Keep your eye on it, but I don't think I would recommend Super Followers as yet to cartoonists. Probably never in the future, but keep an eye on it. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
So, Dave, before we move on to topics, I've got one more thing to say about late-stage social media, and that is, I think if we're going to discuss this, it's important to give some thoughts to our listeners about where it's going next. And of course, I don't know that anybody knows that, but I've got 3 thoughts I want to put in your head. Okay. Number 1, this is a really good time, if you don't have it, to build it, and if you do, to put some more steam behind it. this is a good time to work on your email newsletter.
Oh,
your
amen.
email
Yes.
mailing list.
Yes. It's
great
like a
time.
vinyl record. It's got this
Yes.
core audience that really loves it and just uses it to great effect. Absolutely. I'll co-sign that.
And it's a great way to get to continue getting in touch with your core audience, your super fans. And that's something that you're going to want. Number two, if you don't have your own website that you can control, this is a good time to do that. I'm not talking Tapas or Webtoons. I'm talking about your own website where you can have all of your control, your archives, your messaging, the way you want it, what you want to say, how you want to say it.
Right.
This is the time. If you don't have a website, as we go into this next phase of whatever we're going in, I think a website is going to do you good. And number three, here's my wild card. Make sure that you're all set for RSS. Make sure that your site
really?
has
okay,
RSS.
hold on. We have not talked about this. RSS. Okay, go. I'm listening.
My gut. So here's the thing, and feel free to shoot me down. RSS fell out of favor when Google ended support of its own RSS reader. And RSS stands for really simple syndication. Basically, what happens when you update a new update on your website, it sends out a little kind of condensed version out to RSS. And people could use this on a reader to say, oh, the new Sheldon just posted. I'll go click on that and read that. Or in some cases, they could read the new Sheldon right on their RSS reader.
Yes.
Sound familiar?
Yes.
It was a way for people to get content. Again, this sounds very familiar. It was a way for people to get content from a whole lot of different sites all on one site that they could scroll through.
And can I just interject for 1 second to say, I loved it. I loved RSS.
Yes.
It did everything that I wish social media would do now in terms of like, I subscribe to Brad. I want everything that Brad, and I will limit what I want from Brad. Like if he's posting too much, I'll just scroll past it or I will mute him for a little bit. But RSS readers were great when they were at their height. I love them. And I'm listening with an open heart about what you're saying about RSS.
And not only that, but there was no bullshit because it was, in other words, Twitter, built a whole system where everything was bullshit and you got the occasional content because everything, remember, originally was like 144 characters. So it was very easy to do disposable posts that didn't mean anything.
Right.
But the posts that you updated on your website were always significant. Here's the next comic. Here's the next blog post if you're a blogger. Here's the next movie or the next video. It was always significant. So you didn't get a lot of crap in your RSS feed because they were all significant posts. There wasn't any filler. All right. My spidey sense tells me that RSS is primed. It's existing technology. Everybody uses it. Everybody has it or has it available. If somebody were to put steam behind building the next platform that let you basically rebuild the Google RSS reader and have that in a updated app form, I think that would be a game changer. And it would not be social media. It would be completely different.
Here's my takeaway from this. I want this to be true. I wish this was true. I don't know that this is going to be true. Because there's no, as we found out, one of the reasons why Google abandoned it, there's no money in it for platforms or for technology companies in having a really good RSS reader. And so, however, in the same way that email works as a system by paying for MailChimp, maybe what it would be is somehow either the user or the creator is paying for software access in terms of buying the software or platform access in terms of gaining access to their RSS reader. Maybe that would be the moneymaker that would encourage a small boutique software company to be like, we're going to, listen, you and I both know there are RSS readers right now on the market and they work fine. Yeah. But I feel like its time has passed in a way that breaks my heart because, like you, I am 1,000% on board with the idea that we are in late stage social media. In that the systems that were working in the first 5 years of social media are a little bit breaking down now. You know.
Mm-hmm. I think if it was updated, I think there's a possibility there. And remember, there was no way to make money when they launched Twitter either.
There still isn't. There's a reason. There's a reason why they're doing super followers.
Right. But that's why it's my wild card. I just want you, and it's one that it doesn't take it. RSS is kind of easy to set up. It's probably already activated on your site, or it takes a little click of a button. But something tells me that RSS is involved in the next phase, and I don't know how that is.
Well, and part of this, Brad, goes to our core concern that you and I don't intrinsically trust Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Google to build the platform that is our career.
Yeah.
And sometimes that makes us sound like the old grumpy men of cartooning, where these young cartoonists are building million-person followers on Instagram. Well, that's great, but what does that gain you if you can only reach a sliver of them without having to pay for it? What does that gain you if Instagram changed their terms of service, or if they get increasingly just hostile to the life you want to lead as an artist? There's a lot of ways that the platform can screw you that we've all seen now for 2 or 3 or 4 iterations. And so that's why Brad and I are like, have your own website, have your own mailing list, have your own, again, RSS feed. I wish it were true, but RSS feed, because there's something to be said for owning and controlling every major aspect of your core audience.
Remember, Dave, it's impossible until it's inevitable.
Oh, Brad, what are you, Winston Churchill today? And we will fight them on the beaches. We will fight them in the sea.
Listen, as long as you're doing your old radio announcer voice, you've got a news flash for us, do you not?
You want me to do it in 1940s radio? Because I love
always. The answer to that question is and always shall be yes.
So what's great about this, I found this out only recently. The reason why they went high pitch in World War II announcements is because they were broadcasting in AM, not in FM. And so, Brad, you had to do high pitch because it broadcasted better in the unique wave that was an amplitude modification, not a frequency modification.
Oh, my God.
AM always, so all the, Rhineland and German troops march across the Rhineland going towards Poland, that kind of thing. Everybody had to go high because AM radio works best with a high-pitched voice. Anyway, all that to be said. So,
I'll do the teletype behind you.
Oh, yeah, okay. And the I-95 is backed up today, so if you're coming into town from the I-95, you're going to want to take the ring road. Anyway, I love, by the way, but those teletype, by the way, amazing machines when you would hear those go. They're really satisfying sound. Okay, so I just wanted to put it in your ear in case you did not hear about it by now, that San Diego Comic-Con 2021 has been canceled. So that's 2 years now of San Diego Comic-Con. It's so heartbreaking because they just celebrated their 50th year in 2019. And it's such a bummer that it's now 2 solid years canceled. But I will say this as a lover of San Diego Comic-Con. I was genuinely concerned that they were going to go forward with their July show and that I wasn't going to be able to go for the reasons of health of my family, because they're on a grandfathered booth system. And if I would have had to give up my sweet, sweet booth, and for those of you that have seen me at Comic-Con, I got a corner booth that is delicious. And,
yes, you do.
And if I had to give up that booth, I would be so sad that damn COVID took that away from me too. So I'm quietly glad that they are moving it to 2022, because we're not going to have perfect herd immunity by July, especially on an international level. And so what they're doing is, because I suspect that they're running out of money, Brad, they're doing a November show that is not Comic-Con, but is put on by the folks at Comic-Con. That's a 3-day show. I think it's fair to say that we will have herd immunity in the U.S. by November. Who knows what kind of travel restrictions we'll have to the U.S. from non-herd immunity countries. I imagine there will be some. But I think I would do a November show. Now, I know you intrinsically are not doing Comic-Cons right now, Brad. No. Would you do a show in November?
No. Oh, if it was local...
I mean, if you were a person that did shows,
If it was local, if it was local to me, yes. Yeah. Would I, if I was still doing conventions and I was looking at taking an airplane from Philadelphia to San Diego, it's still a non-starter for me. Yeah, nothing's getting me on a freaking airplane unless it's really, really important.
Don't disagree. And frankly, I'm wearing a mask on every flight I ever take from now on. Because why the hell not? Like, now that we know that we can do it, just wear the mask. Like, save yourself from whatever rhinovirus you're going to get on a flight. So I agree with Brad. I think all of this is to say, I think we should all be prepared for another spring, another summer, and probably an early fall where there are no shows. So if that's part of your income, plan now to have other avenues, because I think it is well into winter of 2021, winter of 2022 until things really start to pick back up again. Anyway, that's just a little bit of news item for everybody. And also, it turns out the city of San Diego is going to have to spend a few $10 million to redo the convention center because in what I think was good civic planning, they opened up the convention center to the homeless population of San Diego during COVID. Which I think is a good humanitarian move. Unfortunately, it's going to cost the city now a bunch of money to kind of fix it back up again. But it's going to take. What I'm saying is, it's going to be a hot minute until San Diego is ready for a full Comic-Con, and I think that's okay, and we should all be okay with that because it's a dicey period for the next 6 to 8 months. So anyway, all right, Brad, let's jump in on the next point for the show, my friend.
So here's the thing. As long as we're talking about Patreon and as long as we're kind of keeping this train running, we've got a question that dovetails nicely with the conversation that we've been having since the top of the show. Comes in from a new Patreon backer, Chris Black, who says, "Hi, Dave and Brad. What's a good strategy for coming up with Patreon tiers when first starting out with a new Patreon account and a new unreleased webcomic?" And Chris said goals, and I changed that for him because there's a difference between a goal and a tier. The tiers are like, at $5 a month, $10 a month. A goal is like at $10,000, I'll do this and that. Right. Goals are not as important on Patreon.
Yeah, they're surprisingly not as impactful, right?
Yeah, they're really not. And not only that, but I mean, they're good because it's like you've got something to talk about on social media and so forth. You've got some messaging. Hey, when we reach this mark, it's good to have a mark like that. But in general, it's not a big driver. So I switched that for him. And I also kind of think that he was talking more about tiers than goals because tiers are much more important to be thinking about at this point than goals.
Well, let's start at the baseline, and I'll go first, Brad, and then you can build from there. Yeah. I want to talk about the baseline tier that you want to offer. Don't offer a $1 tier. The math is pretty clear on this, both in terms of the cut that Patreon takes and in terms of the lost patrons that you get in terms of jumping from $1 to $2. The math just works out consistently that a $2 baseline is the minimum that you want to go with. I mean, you might even want to go $3 at this point, given the state of the world. But at least a $2, $1, the return for you on after Patreon's cut, and the number of sort of additional followers that would be willing at $1 that aren't willing at $2, not worth it. It is better to do $2 as your baseline tier, don't you think, Brad?
Absolutely. I suggest to people all the time, start at the $2 level, and that is your support tier. That is you're not going to give anything of high value at the $2 level. In fact, I would say in general, I would just say, this is the support tier. You like the comic, you want to keep it going. This is a great way to do it. $2
and you can
a month.
You can make it cute in some way of like, this is the friendship tier, this is the super pal tier, this is however you want to do it. You can market it up a little bit, but the basic idea, to Brad's point, is that that's the support tier. So Brad, what is the next tier that people should consider for after a $2 level?
Well, the next level up would be $5. And here you're going to give something that I consider something to be that has I would suggest an exclusive at this point that has a low to medium demand. In other words, your other thing that you can offer is an early access to the comic. You could even kind of do that at the $2 level without hurting yourself. But at the $5 level, you could do early access along with what I call exclusives that have a low to mid level of demand. This can be pinups. This can be
of Dave Kellett. Is that what I'm offering? What am I? Pinups of me?
Yes,
that's definitely low demand, Brad. That is definitely. Even my wife is like, no thanks.
But
she's like, I've got photos of Chris Hemsworth. I don't need pinups of my husband. That's fine.
But this can be something like if you're doing a comic strip, and let's say you're doing 3 comic strips a week, a 4th comic strip a week that becomes an exclusive. That could be a suggestion. Or it could be if you're doing long form, you've got a central storyline. This could be like a once a month or at some kind of regular rate that you do a sideline story, a side story that's not it's not your central story, but it's side characters, and it's important enough for the readers of your story to care about, but the other people aren't going to be affected by not knowing that stuff. Right.
Right.
So
right.
it's low to mid level. And again, I say, and I'll die on this hill. What works on Patreon is exclusive content because people want stuff for their money. And this is how you give it to them, something they can't get anyplace else.
And I would like to jump in, Brad, just to say, because some people might assume wrongly here, all of these assets at the $5 level are digital. And in fact, for maybe even the next level up, do not offer to ship anything. As soon as you offer to ship anything or something is physical, you will eat into your margins to a painful degree. And frankly, the logistics are not worth it. So what are these kind of low to mid-tier items? As Brad said, maybe they're exclusives. You can also do chunks of what will be future books offered as mini ebooks in the way that a Marvel floppy is 30-something pages, but eventually it would have been gathered together as a Loki 150-page graphic novel. Well, you can add or offer those 30-page ebooks, maybe with a custom cover with one panel from page 16 blown up as a specialized cover with the logo. Like, you don't have to put a lot of work into it, but it's unique. It's a fun way to read it. They can read it on their phone if they're on a bus or a train or waiting for a doctor. And it's a nice little exclusive for people to get.
I used to do that with Evil Inc. Way back in the day. I was a month ahead on Evil Inc. So I put up the entire month's worth of comics into a PDF for my Patreon backers. And I think this was at the $5 level. And so they could see the entire month. They could read the whole thing ahead of time. And if you're, and by the way, Chris is saying he's just starting his comic. Well, this is a good time to do something like that because he doesn't have this imaginary deadline over his head.
Oh, yeah. So like give it a minute, build up that archive.
He could get 2 months ahead, right? And then give himself a buffer month. And then he could offer that as like you get the whole month at the first day of the month in a PDF. That would be something that would be exclusive and have value.
Other exclusives that you could do are process videos, either screen capture sped up from Photoshop or CSP, or a mounted iPhone over your drawing if you're drawing analog. Those are very easy to put together. You can put a little traveling music that's free to, copyright free music on the back, and you're done in 10, 15 minutes. You're uploading that. Basically, don't give yourself additional work. See what sneak peeks or exclusives or behind the scenes you can share that don't add time to your workload, because you will come both to regret that choice and it will limit what you can produce to the story that is your core concern, Right.
Now that takes you to the $10 level. These are what I call high demand exclusives. All right. This is stuff that you can perceive a high demand for. This might be a side storyline that's a little bit more compelling to your audience.
Right.
And this can also be, depending on who you are and what you're comfortable with, things like Dave was talking about, the time lapse. This might be a live draw that you do on Twitch on a repeatable schedule. Right. Also, things like pinups. There's something that Scott does, Scott Kurtz, that I think is a great idea for Table Titans. He does what I call a community-specific reward. He does a complete character sheet that you can use for your D&D game. That's based
fun.
on
Table
Titans.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so every month he does, you get the complete stats and everything for this character. And it's somebody that you can play in your D&D game that's out of the Table Titans universe.
By the way, can we pause for a second? Because the world should know that I've only played Dungeons and Dragons once. And that was with you and Scott in Seattle. Do you remember this?
That's right. Yes, I remember that.
We did it over beers, and I was like, so wait, do I get to do a voice? And Scott's like, you can absolutely do a voice. And I'm like, I'm doing a voice the whole game. Yep. And then like 20 minutes in, everyone's like, all right, Dave, can you stop doing that voice? That's really annoying. But
we get it with the voice.
Weren't we going to play a Dungeons and Dragons game, you and me and Scott? I thought we were on Zoom.
For a while, we were talking about doing it and recording it and making it like a thing. We had actually talked about that.
It's funny, one of those ideas that you're like, yeah, let's do it. And then nobody does anything about it for months at a time.
And I think we actually talked about bringing the kid, at some point, my boys were like, yeah, we could do that too. I'm like, yeah, more the merrier. Because my two kids are really into D&D. They play more than I ever did.
I love the idea of two seasoned Dungeons and Dragons people teaching me how to do it, whereas I'm just bullshitting my way through. Like, all right, I throw a fire axe at his head. Nope, didn't work. All right, okay, keep going. I'm so sorry. So Scott creates custom character sheets.
Yeah, and there's something we need to talk about here at this point too. Is Dave and I are throwing a lot of ideas at you, but you've got to decide what for you is like a high demand reward, what's a low demand exclusive. All of these things could fit in different places. In other words, when we're talking about things
depending on your workload, depending on how you work. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
You can do and other options. And again, you've got to decide where it fits for you. Other options is high res art. Again, I've mentioned pinups. Here's one that goes at an upper tier level, even maybe beyond the $10 tier. I got mine at the $20 tier. And for some of these, you've got to be a little bit careful how you do them, because I don't suggest this for somebody starting out. But for later on, when you get your sea legs, these are tiers that don't pay out every month. They pay out maybe every 3 months or every 2 months.
Right.
In general, I say don't do that. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But once you get your sea legs and you kind of know what you're doing, I've got at the $20 level, you get original art from the Evil Ink comic strip every 3 months. It's a kind of a bear to keep track of it. But again, once you're seasoned. And at the $50 level, and I strongly suggest this later on, every other month at the $50 level, you get a digital commission. Right. So you get to say, I've got two, you can have up to 2 characters. I want these 2 characters to be, walking down the street doing whatever. Not only is that something that I've got that drives a very high level commission that I had to put a limit on. I think the limit's 7 right now because I can't keep up with more than that. But not only is that a high driver, but that generates, guess what? Another piece of exclusive that I can post for my Patreon backers. When I'm done with that commission, I don't post it anywhere other than for my Patreon backers. That's another exclusive.
Right. And I want to, that's a great idea, first of all. Second of all, I want to say that as you're designing your tiers, I think there is something to be said for picking one tier, and I would recommend the $5 level, where you sort of mentally tell yourself, this is where the magic happens. So basically, anytime you have a freebie, anytime you have exclusive, a sneak peek, a behind the scenes, a this or that, a digital thing that someone can download, that level is always being offered at 2. That way you can, in your marketing, make that the special level. Like that's the one that has a little animated GIF instead of as a static image on Patreon. That's the one that you're always pushing people to subscribe to, because that's the one that will, for the number of people involved, will bring you the most amount of bulk money for a low jump in price of like $5. Like to Brad's point, you won't get many people at the $20 level or the $10 level, but they'll be very worth it long term, right? So absolutely, you want to service those unique type patrons, but $5, something around that range, is really good at making that the big push point for your patronage. And then my final thought, Brad, would be, and I'm sure you have more to go, but part of this is a little bit of legwork for you, and that's okay. And what I mean by that is you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Patreon's been around 3 or 4 years, and there are other cartoonists that are doing work similar to you, and I guarantee that's the case. Where if you're doing a romance comic, if you're doing an adventure comic, if you're doing a single panel comic, if you're doing a sci-fi comic, take 20 minutes, 2 hours, 3 hours on Patreon and see what they offer. Make a little Excel sheet. Honest to God, this is a moment of genuine work. Make an Excel sheet, say, what do they offer at $5? Bing, bing, bing. What do they offer at $10? Bing, bing, bing. How do they market it? Like, you can make little columns of what terms do they use to describe that. And so if you look at 5, 6, 7 cartoonists, you will start to see a pattern. And more than anything else, you will immediately go, oh snap, that thing that they're doing over here, I can do that at $5 level. Oh snap, that thing that they're doing at the $10 level over there, I can bring that. And you'll start to build and cobble together from existing artists doing existing successful Patreons, things you can use in your own field.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about setting up your tiers. Okay. And Dave mentioned an animated GIF. And I like, by the way, the idea of having animated images on your tier page, especially like Dave says, to point them to the one that you really want them to choose.
Right.
Like having one of them animated where the others are static is kind of effective. But let's talk about setting up your tiers.
It's kind of like how when any website says, "Hey, do you want to go to paperless billing?" Yes, 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 and like no is this tiny little font. It's like
yes, yeah, absolutely. It's the same kind of thing. But let's talk about those tiers because so many people do their tiers wrong, and it's really this is all common sense stuff. This is not like I've got some inside track. Let's talk about what people do wrong with tiers. Number one, and this is the headline. This is all of your messaging. They talk about what's in it for them as the creator instead of talking about what's in it for you as the backer. Your backer wants to know what's in it for them. Right. You need to tell them, and you need to make it as clear as possible. People want things for their money. It's no different on Patreon, and you need to tell them what's in it for them, not what's in it for you. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, keep your wording short. So many people make this big mistake on Patreon tiers, and it's because they haven't bothered to see how it actually looks. You see people go for the $5 level, and it goes $5. This is the friendship level. Boy, oh boy, are you a friend? I want to be your friend and you want to be my friend. This is a friendship level. And if you want to... Way too many fucking words. You know why? If you look at your Patreon tier page, it cuts off after 4 lines.
It sure does,
So if you're saying all that bullshit, nobody's seeing the important part, which what's in it for the backer.
Oh my God. I love it when we get salty, Brad Geiger. You went from friendly neighborhood cartoonist to, listen, you idiot. If you put too many friendships in there, that damn thing cuts it off. I love it. Your face gets red. You become like a guy down at the dock, like, this boat was supposed to be unloaded 4 hours ago, you jokers. What are you doing sitting on your tuckers? I'm teaching you about Patreon over here.
Oh, it makes me so mad when I see it. You can imagine what it's like living with me.
I see the switch in you. You go from like, hey guys, we're gonna talk about Patreon. And listen to the fuckers, you goddamn with the list of the friendship. Brad Geiger. I'm so angry.
You just look at your Patreon tier page. It cuts off after 4 lines. That means you've got it. You know what you do? You do bullet points. You keep it short and simple. You don't start with a lot of chatter. You can title it like friendship level. That's up at the title part. But when it comes to writing that chatter, you need to get to the freaking point.
Let me jump in real quick, too, to talk about those bullet points, because you can learn from every selling web page that ever existed where you compare the Apple Pro to the Apple Pro Plus, right? And it shows the bullet points, but because this drives me nuts when people don't do basic things like this. The bullet points have to be consistent so that you see that this one is all these things match up, and at the bottom of this list is 3 more things, right? Now you think, oh, that's obvious. I've seen so many cartoonists that like their bullet lists are jumbled up. So if original art is the first one, it has to be original art of the next bullet list. Don't make it hard on yourself. Just learn from basic salesmanship websites and do it clean and in order with brief descriptions.
And let's talk about order. Every Patreon campaign is set up like this, where when you go, let's say, from the $2 level to the $5 level, at the $5 level, you get everything from the $2 level, right? Everybody's got it set up like that.
Right.
The fact that you get everything from the previous level is not bullet point number 1. It's the last in the list of bullet points. Why? It's the least important thing. Right. What I want to know about the $5 level is what's the new thing I'm getting? What's the important thing I'm getting? Right. So many people have everything from the previous level as their first bullet point. It's the least important thing. By the way, anybody that's been on Twitter for more than 5 minutes already knows this. You almost don't have to tell them, okay? But it is important to note it, but you note it at the end of your list, not at the beginning. It's the least important thing. And my final point I'm going to make today is if you have this kind of wording on your Twitter, on your boy, you can tell I'm getting loopy now. If you have this kind of wording on your Patreon.
Someone brought up the war and Grandpa's getting flustered. Boom! I hear you can smell the smoke over Saigon, and Grandpa's having some trouble.
I'm getting woozy. Okay. If you have this kind of wording on Patreon, I want you to really, really consider removing it, okay? And you see this a lot. You'll get XYZ reward whenever it's available. And every once in a while, I'll do ABC. And sometimes there'll be a DEF. Listen, if you want a person to back you on Patreon month after month after month, you need a reward that's going to be offered month after month after month. I don't want to see any of these rewards that are sometimes and whenever this is ready and whenever I get, no words like whenever, sometimes, maybe. You don't want a maybe in a Patreon page.
It's basically like the mental equivalent of asking people to do math. You don't want them, don't make it hard for them. Like, you'll also, listen, when Saturn is rising in Aquarius and the moon is in the third quarter of, then you'll get an ebook. Wait, what? What am I doing? How do I track this? What do I, like,
not only that, it's freaking,
Brad's got a great point there.
It's freaking impolite, right? You're saying, give me money, and every once in a while, maybe if I'm feeling like it, I'll give you a reward. Well, who signs up for that?
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind signs up for that. But you'd be surprised how many Patreon people are doing exactly that kind of outreach.
I wish people could see Brad's face. Is getting more and more peppery on this whole topic. I thought this was going to be a fun topic, and Brad is visibly sweating now. That shirt is not. There's massive sweat rings. He's dabbing his brow with a cloth like an old Southern gentleman. He's very angry about this. No, but all of this is good points, and it's. Brad's speaking truth. And frankly, Brad, you just taught me, because the earlier point about bullet points where the most important things are up at the top, I actually think I have that wrong. So I thank you, because I actually agree with you on that point. And in general, I think this people are hesitant to start thinking about their own tiers when they're launching because, and this leads into our next topic, they're hesitant to make it a marketing event that they're proud of and can stand behind confidently. They're like, I don't know, this tier is, I mean, maybe if you like my ebooks, maybe. One of these things is you've got to jump in with 2 feet, knowing that there is nothing wrong with this. There's nothing impolite. There's nothing sassy about you having a Patreon. It is a totally legitimate thing to say, I've given a lot of free art to the world. Do you like it? Do you back it? Do you want more of it? Would you like certain sort of gifts and rewards for doing so? Well, here are the tiers. And that, Brad, that brings me into our next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is, I have noticed, for every artist that is hesitant to use Patreon, they're like, you can tell they got a book deal, or their kind of art was maybe gallery kind of art, and they never really, they saw Patreon as the low form of an artist, kind of, tin cup begging on the side of the corner, or, that kind of thing. A thing that I have noticed more and more, because Patreon's been around long enough now, where every once in a while you see what I would describe as Patreon panic, right?
Yeah.
And this is what it is. The artists that previously would never have deigned to use Patreon because it was like rattling the tin cup. Suddenly either a baby's coming, or that second book deal didn't come through, or the publisher's having some trouble getting this, and then all of a sudden Brad's like, hey gang, hey friends, guess what? I'm bringing my work to Patreon. Just thought this might be fun to try out. And you can feel the sudden panic of like, turns out that second kid's going to be expensive. I better get a Patreon going. Those diapers don't pay for themselves.
Yeah, you can see the flap sweat on the page.
Yeah, am I alone in seeing this Patreon panic where they're like, suddenly there's something, an event in their career, and you can see it like a switch. About 3 weeks later, they're like, so I'm trying out Patreon. I think this might be the fun way to go.
Yeah, they're trying very hard to keep it together, to walk a straight line. It's like, and they always use that same kind of pitch. It's kind of like, hey, here's something that I'm just trying out. You know what it is? We always joke about a company that says, you spoke and we listened. This is the exact same thing.
Because you can see right through both of like, no, listen, and by the way, neither Brad nor I are poo-pooing the act that artist, that cartoonist is bringing their work to Patreon. What we're saying is, it is interesting that people have such hesitancy or shyness or insecurity that their work has value to be backed on Patreon, that it takes a moment of panic to finally get them to go, oh, you know what? It's okay for me to try try to make a living from my art. And I think that's an unfortunate thing that a lot of artists have to struggle with, is just that, no, it is okay to say, I'm going to use Patreon, I'm going to use Kickstarter. If I need to, I'm going to do ad support. I'm going to do whatever it takes to make a career out of my art. There's nothing wrong with building an independent career that you can own and control using these resources.
Oh my God, you're going to get me started on another rant.
Oh, I love it.
Let's
get Salty Grandpa going.
At the end of the day, this is all about imposter syndrome. What you're seeing there is imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome leads to such bad decision making. You got to get on top of it. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. I saw not too long ago, somebody was given some advice on Patreon, and they said, I only post once a week because I don't want to spam my Patreon backers. That's imposter syndrome. And it's imposter syndrome of the worst kind. You know why? It's impossible to spam your Patreon backers. They are the people that signed up for you. They love you. They want to see. If I post 100 posts for my Patreon backers, you know what they want? They want 101. I can't post enough stuff for them. You can't spam a Patreon backer.
Absolutely. God, do I co-sign that. And also, I will go one further. We already established early in the show that the algorithms for all these platforms are already throttling back what they're seeing from you. So that one post that you're making like once a month where you go, oh, by the way, I also have a Patreon and you guys can back it if you want. No one is seeing that because it was only once. Only a third of the people saw it because it got throttled in their algorithm. It's like that classic thing. You've got to say it 7 times. And in order for people to see it 7 times on social media, you kind of have to say it 28, 30 times.
Well, Dave, this is even worse than that. This is what they're posting actually on Patreon.
Oh,
it's
God.
not a post
my God.
about
No,
Patreon.
no, that's not true. No, that's not true. No.
Well, you were watching it at the same time I was. We were watching the same
you're
thing.
You're talking about that Patreon. Yes. No, I do know.
We're not going to go into details, but listen, this person was talking about posting for his Patreon backers only once a week because he didn't want to spam them.
Yes.
You can't
I remember.
Spam a Patreon backer. That's what they signed up for. This is what they signed up for.
So it gives nobody any context enough to track it back to who said it. If we say Brad and I were watching a Patreon-sponsored event about the best ways to use Patreon, and one artist was saying like, oh, I only do it once a month because I don't want to spam them. I have rarely seen Brad turn a brighter shade of red than at that moment, where I think he literally flipped his table over. He was so like, what? Spam your Patreon backers. These are the people that have paid. Look at you dabbing your neck like an old grandmother.
I'm literally like when you put the back of your hand to your face to see how warm it is, I'm literally burning up. Yeah, you can't. Please. If you didn't hear a single other thing we heard, this is imposter syndrome talking, and it's going to lead you to this bad decision and a whole slew of other bad decisions. Please get over yourself. These are your Patreon backers. They love you. They want you. They want more from you. You can't spam them. You just can't. It's impossible to spam your Patreon backers.
This might be helpful for some people out there to hear. So let me take this up to the 3,000 foot level.
Oh,
and say, as an artist, we only get one round on this earth and our life is short. And if you're waiting for permission to be confident of your art, oh my God, you're going to be waiting for decades. Until eventually what happens is you turn 60 or 70 and you see this in people. They go, to hell with it. I'm finally going to be me. I'm finally going to be comfortable in my own skin. It is okay to be confident and assertive that you are absolutely getting better, but you're good enough right now to say, I have a Patreon. I have a Kickstarter. I'm making a book. I have a book for sale. Hey, I'm here at this convention. Whatever it is, you can shake off that imposter syndrome. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes small steps, but you only get one round in this life. So take advantage of the time that you have and foster a confidence in yourself that you are worthy of having.
Absolutely. As Stuart Smalley used to say, you're good enough, you're smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like you.
Well, also, Brad, just the flip side of that, think of all the assholes that don't deserve our time and effort, who are so confident in this world.
They walk
through life. Yeah, they walk through life talking constantly. Maybe it's me. I don't know. They talk constantly. But you know what I mean? With an unwarranted confidence. And so you can take 3% of that confidence away from them, give it to yourself and say, you know what? No, I'm worthy of having a book on for sale. I'm worthy of having patrons. I'm worthy of having a Kickstarter. I'm worthy of people coming up to me at a Comic-Con. It is okay, and that is worth fostering in you as an artist to shake off imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. There's nothing more important. And we're going to keep harping on it on this show until we get through to you. Get rid of that imposter syndrome. And until then, you've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my pal Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my friend Dave Kellett, co-director of Stripped, and cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And the Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media. And a reminder that today's sponsor is our fantastic friends over at bonjoro.com, bonjoro.com. You can sign up for a 14-day free trial. And then if things are really kicking for you, and we think they will be, you can use the comic code ComicLabApril, all one word, to get 20% off for life.
If you love Comic Lab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that like Brad's forehead vein when he's talking about imposter syndrome. Seriously, see a doctor about that.
But Dave, have you seen the Phyllis Diller episode yet?
I've not, no.
Watch the Phyllis Diller episode. You're going to see something that's canon in the Muppet universe that we've either didn't know or forgot about it. You'll see. You remember when they did that ballroom scene, right?
Oh, the spinning, yep.
You'll see in the Phyllis Diller episode Statler dancing with Waldorf. I always knew there was something going on between those two guys, and they're dancing together on the Muppet Show.
That's fantastic. Henson and
Isn't
Oz
that
working
wonderful?
it in 1983. Yeah. That's fantastic.
This was set. Oh God, this was late. This had to be 77 or 78. I mean, it's really beautiful to see how they just and by the way, them dancing together was not the joke. They had punchlines and everything.
It was a moment. Yeah, that's what I mean. It was like one of those genuine moments.
It was just presented. Yeah. Here's these two guys dancing together, and nobody said boo about it.
Oh, nobody said boo. Brad, you had to ruin a beautiful moment by saying no one said boo about it.
It was the most genuine thing I could think of to say.
Oh, the most genuine Midwesternism. Oh, nobody said boo about it. Why did I do Southern? That's not Midwestern.